Welcome to Silmarillion Stories. We're the Lorehounds, your guides to Tolkien's world of Middle-earth. I'm John, and this is our podcast for Of the Noldor in Beleriand, the 17th portion of the Silmarillion. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the founding of Gondolin and the Wrath of Thingol. If you want to get in on the Tolkien talk, send an email to lotr@thelorehounds.com or visit thelorehounds.com/contact to leave a voicemail or a contact form entry. One more note, if you want to support us directly, click the link tree in the show notes and follow it to Supercast or Patreon, where you can get early and ad-free access to all of our podcasts, plus bonus content like Second Breakfast, 11sies, and Shireside Chats. Today, our returning guest is Aaron from the Lore of the Rings podcast. Welcome back, Aaron, to the Lorehounds podcast. It's been a while, although I've been on your podcast, but it's been a while since you've been on an episode of Silmarillion Stories. How you doing?
Yes, thank you, John. Thanks for having me back. I feel honored that you reached back out to me and that we can talk Silmarillion and Tolkien. It's always a fun journey.
Of course. I mean, the last time we did an episode together, I don't even remember what episode it was. They all blend together after a while. But I remember we were in the Discord. You joined our Discord shortly thereafter, and everybody was like, this is great. This guy's great. He knows all the Tolkien stuff. So, it's rare because I'm so deep in this stuff. It's rare that I have a conversation with someone and I'm like, oh, wow, he knows more than me. And you definitely make me feel like that. So I appreciate you coming on to share your wisdom.
Well, the feeling is certainly mutual because I talk with you and I'm like, wow, I wish I knew as much as John did. Or I wish I could think about things that way. So I guess we're in good company, I suppose.
There you go. Good conversation with good minds. What more could you ask for?
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to talk a little bit about your podcast before we jump into things?
Sure, absolutely. So I am the producer and the single host of the Lore of the Rings podcast. On that show, we wander the world and works of J.R.R. Tolkien. And it's really geared more for folks who have seen the movies and maybe have attempted to read the books, but found them a little bit difficult. They're not the easiest read for most people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really just try to wander into the written word that Tolkien provided us and try to draw it back to the movies. So, a big thing in the movies, you don't really see a lot, but there's the two trees of Valinor. They're in every single one of the movies. Well, those are actually really big pieces of lore in Tolkien's world. And it enriches your viewing experience when you see that lore. And then you can point out to small details in the Peter Jackson films where he's pulling from that wider lore that now when you go watch those movies, it's a much deeper experience. So I really try to cater to that. I really try to cater to connections and, the family line connections and origin stories and how that plays out in the future. So the wandering, the connection, that's kind of what we do over on the Lore of the Rings podcast.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm loving your podcast. They're bite-sized episodes. They're about 15 to 30 minutes, right? So it's very digestible, and that's great because that's a lot of what we try to do here. That's a lot of, let us be the experts and we will help you have a working knowledge of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of like to think of the role of Gandalf or Aragorn as mighty wanderers, right? Who had wandered all over the land, and they sort of guide Frodo and Sam and the others on this quest. And I kind of like to feel like I can kind of step into Aragorn's boots just a little bit and be like, let me guide you through this land.
All right, let's take these stinky hobbits back on a journey back all the way to the First Age. We're way before the time of the Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
And we're on a continent that doesn't even exist, or a portion of a continent that doesn't even exist at the time of the Lord of the Rings. Back in Beleriand, all the way looking at 2 with a hint of a third kingdom within this chapter. And I want to add, I have not yet recorded my episode of Beleriand and its realms. So I'm recording these episodes in reverse, and boy, is this a better chapter.
Yeah, this chapter is, there's some story here, there's some dialogue here, there's some intrigue and mystery, there's a lot of oaths. I think there's at least 3 oaths that come into play here. And so this chapter is a lot more fun than simply the geography of Beleriand and its realms. So this is a good chapter.
That's interesting that you bring up the oaths. I noticed the oaths, but I didn't notice how many. That's super interesting. So I'm glad you brought that up. Let's talk about that once we get to the Doriath section. I think that's where it mostly comes up.
Yeah, right? For sure.
So this chapter is pretty short, honestly, and it's pretty condensed into two sections: the section about Gondolin, the section about Doriath. Let's start in Gondolin. So we've got Ulmo telling Turgon that it's time. He's allowed to settle Gondolin. He's allowed to find this hidden rock. And Turgon has this workforce working in secret, trying to build up this kingdom. And it's supposed to be the whole big deal of elven culture from Tyrion is back now. It's back, baby. It's in Middle Earth. What's your read on Gondolin? Are you a big Gondolin stan?
Yes, I really love the story of Gondolin for a lot of different reasons. One is it's ties back to the origins of Elrond, right? So you get some Elrond connections there. The fall of Gondolin was actually one of the first stories that that Tolkien started to articulate, shall we say? Even from the trenches of World War I, right? 1917. There's copies of this or sketches and drafts of this story that go all the way back to then. So it's interesting to see the founding of Gondolin, which really this chapter is really dealing with. Yeah, Gondolin. I'm a big fan of Gondolin. I think it's a really cool, interesting place. If I were to go to the first age of Middle Earth, Gondolin would be on my list of places to visit.
Oh, definitely. They've got 1 million craft breweries. They've got all of the leisure activities that you want from an elven kingdom. They've got it in Gondolin.
Yeah. It was as close to paradise as they could get, right? I mean, they left their city Tirion on the hill of Tuna over there in Valinor, way in the west, and that was really Turgon's inspiration was how do we get as close to that paradisical city as we had, and they achieved that. They achieved that for what they could do in Middle Earth. Yeah, craft breweries, art galleries, whatever your choice of leisure. I'm sure they had it in Gondolin.
That's awesome. You bring up a good point, though. It's close to Tyrion, but Ulmo makes a really strong point to Turgon. Don't forget, I'll allow you to outlast all the other kingdoms of the elves in Middle Earth, but your real place is in the West, and I can't change that. I can't get you out from under Mandos's doom. I can't make this a permanent home, but enjoy it while you have it. And perhaps that's a lesson for us all, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really interesting prophecy there that Ulmo provides, right? Which is this place is going to outlast all of the other strongholds.
Right, which implies that they will all fall.
Yes, that
none of them will last.
None of them will last. And even when the messenger comes, and maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but even when the messenger comes to warn them that it's time for them to leave Gondolin, at that point, Turgon has forgotten Ulmo's warning here of he loves his city, right? And he thinks it's safe, and they don't want to leave. And Turgon really forgets this blessing from Ulmo, and that does lead to the downfall of Gondolin.
It's funny because when we first started the Silmarillion reading, I tried to implement a spoiler policy of don't spoil future portions of the Silmarillion. And as I was going through it, I was like, well, Tolkien spoils himself, so I don't care anymore.
Yes.
We're just going to go with it. We're going to talk about all the connections.
Yeah. And I don't remember all of the connections of Gondolin. Gondolin is actually mentioned in The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books many times. And I think in at least half of those references, it's referenced in connection with Nargothrond and also with the fall of both Nargothrond and Gondolin, right? So there's this connection. Nargothrond is the place that Finrod will found. Ulmo inspired Finrod to go create Nargothrond, and then Ulmo inspired Turgon to create Gondolin. And so you can't talk about Gondolin without its fall, because that's why it was so important, was because it became the last stronghold and it fell. So it's hard not to have that spoiler, but that's
nobody spoils Tolkien like Tolkien. That's my motto, and especially in his extended writings. But both of them, I love that they get twin dreams, and they both wake up after one wild night out, and they're like, I have something to do, and they just run away from each other. But that's super cool, and boy, does Tolkien love his kingdoms hidden in caves. That's just he just loves a hidden kingdom. Is Melkor super bad at geography where he can't find any of these places?
I don't know. And I remember reading a reference somewhere at some point that the Eagles of Banwë kind of keep his overhead spies from actually getting close to Gondolin.
Mm,
I can't. That's not in this chapter, and I can't remember if that's in the Silmarillion or where I picked that up. But I do
yeah.
remember reading that. But it's like, yeah, by process of elimination, Melkor, you probably could have figured out, hey, those really tall mountains that I can't see anything over. There's probably something behind them.
Right.
But it's this is one of the characteristics of Tolkien's villains is they have these weak spots that seem so obvious to us, but they are weak spots for in the hubris of these villains that they just don't
Hmm.
think about something. Sauron never considered that somebody would actually destroy his beautiful golden ring,
Right.
and that led to his
Right.
downfall, right? So maybe there's something there with Morgoth where it's like, nah, nobody could actually get through those mountains, so I'm not even going to
Right.
worry about it. I don't know.
And I'll at least say Doriath at least has the girdle of Melian. It at least
Right.
has actual Maiar defense, and I guess Gondolin has a little bit of Ulmo defense too,
Yeah, it does. So
and
you bring
Nargothrond.
Yeah, Nargothrond
Yeah,
as well. Nargothrond has the river. I think what is it? Is the river Sirion?
I
I don't
believe
have
so.
I don't have a map in front of me right now, but that river was like almost protected river. Uh, Gondolin is in this sort of vale in these mountains, and I think in the history of Middle Earth, they mentioned that this was sort of an ancient lake bed where the
Mm,
lake had then kind of dread out, had left and kind of left this place. But yeah, you've got a lot of connections to water with Gondolin. Um, there's all these fountains that Turgon has built within Gondolin, and even the Quenya word for Gondolin is, and I'm going to have to pronounce this, so bear with me. Ondolindile, Ondolindile, something like that.
all right.
Which means the music, the rock and music, the rock of the music of water, right? And
Yeah.
so you've got all
Yeah.
these connections to water in both Nargothrond and Gondolin, all inspired by Ulmo, and so you have that a little bit of protection from Ulmo, who is the valor of the water, right, of the
Right.
seas and the oceans.
Do you think that the discord of Melkor, the destruction of Melkor upon Middle Earth, had something to do with the formation of these caves and these underground areas? Because I'm a little bit of the idea that everything was pretty bland before Melkor did his whole improvisational jazz solo on Middle Earth.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you talk about the perfection of the creation of Arda, right? And the Valar kind of created these beautiful
Hmm.
things. And it was only with the adversity and the discord, as you say, of Melkor, where new things came into thought and being, right? So like there was water, but then Melkor introduces cold, and then you
Hmm.
get the beauty of snow and ice,
Right.
right? Which can be biting and horrible, and one reason why I just left Utah. But it also has its beauty and it's like wonderful things too, and so you see that Melkor kind of prods along these forces of light and good to create something better than what they otherwise would have thought of. Now, I don't want to necessarily say that evil then in Tolkien's cosmology that evil is a necessary thing to advance and progress,
Hmm.
but I would say that the beauty of divinity is that it can take any sort of discord or adversity, any bad situation, and turn it into something good, right?
Right.
So you have plains. Morgoth creates caves. Well, let's turn it into something good. Let's create some hidden kingdoms or some things like that,
Right.
right? And so I think that speaks to the hope and the optimism that is generally found throughout Tolkien works.
It's very much in line what you're saying with the music of the Ainur. How you have the beautiful melodies of all the Valar except Melkor. Melkor comes in, plays a dissonant chord, and Eru Iluvatar says, "Hold my beer," and
Yeah.
just plays an amazing jazz solo, an amazing harmonization on top of everything that makes everything feel right. And that's Tolkien's worldview. I think is that the pain is not good, but it's necessary for the beauty.
Yeah, that growth can come from sorrow, and from evil things happening,
Right.
that they can all turn to good, for
Right.
sure.
Well, we get a Cinderella story next,
Yeah,
which is you have to make armors to these measurements and a sort of this specification and leave them in Nevrast, leave them where you are now for someone to come warn you later. What if Turin didn't go on a diet? You know what I mean? Like what happens? He gains a couple pounds, he can't fit in the armor. Gondolin's gone.
yeah. That's an interesting question. 'Cause it speaks to like how do the Valar know what's going to happen in the future?
Right.
and therefore they can take steps now to prevent what's going to happen in the future. And Olmo knows down to the inch what sort of armor, or maybe it taught them how to make like flexible armor or something.
He invented the elastic waist just for
there you
Thorin.
go. Yes, the elastic waistband on these pants.
Elastic chainmail. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, but they almost seems to have some portent of the future and is able to take action now. And even in this chapter, Melion will say later on that the Valar are going to leave those in Middle Earth to kind of their own devices, except for the uttermost need. And so almost sort of playing interventionist here. And he, of all the Valar, was the only one who was like, I'm still going to help you, even though I can't. But I just wonder, I haven't done the math here, but I just wonder how long that set of armor and that sword sort of sat in the ancient halls of Nevrast all alone, and that was on the coast. Like, is it collecting, like, you get the sea breeze? Is it starting to rust? Or was it just that perfect that it didn't have to?
I get the sense that elven smithing is similar, like high elf smithing is similar to like Valyrian steel in the Game of Thrones world, whereas it just doesn't dull because you see, Sting in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, right? It's just sharp, even though it's been in a troll den for however long.
Yeah, that's true. And even as we talk about Gondolin, you have those two swords that Gandalf and Thorin pick up, and they were still shiny and bright, even from the work of the first age. So yeah, maybe they did have some skill or some magic or
they got the
power.
zhuzh.
Yeah, sure.
Elven je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, there you go.
We have a listener from Quebec, as he would say, and he writes in using French phrases within his English emails just to harass me, to make me say that.
Yeah, yes,
and it's a lot of fun.
There you go. There you go. That's great.
So, any other thoughts on Gondolin before we discuss Doriath?
Yeah. So right before we leave Gondolin, a couple of mentions here. It mentions Idril, also called Celebrimbor. She will be the mother of Eärendil. Eärendil, of course, will carry one of the Silmarils. Sorry, spoiler alert for the rest of the Silmarillion here. But Eärendil is the father of Elrond, and then of course all the Elrond stuff that you get in the Lord of the Rings. So this is where Elrond's connection to Gondolin comes. It would be his grandmother Idril was sort of born and raised there in Gondor. I think that's good on Gondolin for now. But I just wanted to make that Elrond connection before we left.
That's a good connection. That's a good point. So I know next month we'll be doing of Maeglin, and then we'll get even more Gondolin nonsense.
Yes, absolutely. Maeglin that's a tragedy of a tale.
I know, but it's one of my favorite tales. Can I tell you, I so hoped for Rings of Power to have Maeglin as part of this like lost elf thing, this like dark elf kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because it's not explicitly stated that he dies ever. It's kind of like the Stannis death in Game of Thrones. Like he doesn't die on screen. It could still live.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, getting thrown over a wall and bouncing off the wall, I think 3 times into the fire. I guess, Well, I guess if we're going by Star Wars, then if you fall into a pit, you're more likely to survive than to not. So
right.
There you go.
Look, if you can make rings out of mithril, if a mithril is Silmaril juice, then I think that we can have Maeglin still around.
Yeah, we could. I'm not exactly a big fan of mithril as Silmaril.
I'm not either, but I'm living with it at this point.
I know you have to.
What it is.
You just have to. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Doriath for a little bit. Galadriel's hanging out in Doriath. She's real chill about it. Well, Finrod is going on forging Nargothrond, and Melian, he's like, hey, can you give me the gossip? Just between us.
Just between us girls.
Yep. But and Galadriel gives us essentially the Rings of Power opening, which is just Noldor propaganda of we came to get the Silmarils back and nothing else. There were no hiccups along the way. We were just fine. We all sailed together. We all held hands. I love Melian here. Do I not strike near the truth? And Galadriel replies, near.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's so I love young Galadriel, and I feel like we were robbed of a lot of writings of Galadriel by Tolkien dying when he did.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we know he was working on her tale even in the last month of his life, right? I think Christopher Tolkien let us know
I
that.
think that's right. Yeah.
But yeah, young Galadriel here in the First Age, and she came to Middle Earth because she wanted to rule kingdoms of her own. And it's interesting here that she actually doesn't necessarily end up doing that in the First Age. But here in the First Age, she's hanging out with Melion for a long, long time. And she gets that tutelage from Melion. They have a lot of different conversations. And I think Galadriel learns a lot from Melion. Melion's really wise. And Thingol is, you think Melkor is pretty stupid. Well, here's Thingol, he's married to like a demigod and he hardly listens to her.
The smartest thing Thingol ever did was marry Melion. And that was the last smart thing.
That was the last thing he did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, Melion she's pretty wise. She's kind of guessing what's going on here. And Galadriel is not really willing to say, she's not lying. But she's just saying, yeah, there's more of it, right? And maybe Thingol needs to know, but I'm not the one to tell him. Like, it's not really me. And, to her credit, she didn't really participate in the kin slaying. They kind of showed up afterwards. And in fact, their mother was of the Teleri, who were victims of the kinslaying, and so that's why they're even connected here into Doriath anyway. But still, she doesn't want to give the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And what do they say in court? The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Is that how it goes? Yeah, there you go.
Well, I think that Galadriel and Finrod both do a similar thing where they go, well, that's not my story to tell, because that was not my wrongdoing. And they don't want to throw the Sons of Feanor under the bus. I think that's where they're at.
Yeah, they don't. And they also know they're aware of the Doom of Mandos, right? And that Doom of Mandos, and that's connection to the Oath of Feanor. So this is one of the oaths that kind of comes into play in this chapter, was the Oath of Feanor and his sons. Yeah, so let's go to that. Let's go. Melion, she learns this stuff from Galadriel. She goes and she talks to Thingol about this stuff. And Thingol realizes, yeah, the Noldor, they didn't really come. They weren't really messengers. They haven't really come. They came just in time to help us in the previous chapters. But they only came, he says, they came at the right time by chance. Right? And chance is an interesting theme when it comes to Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. There's a lot to do with chance of Gandalf meeting Thorin, Bilbo finding the ring, Frodo barely escaping the Nazgul. This theme of chance comes up a lot, and it's right here again in the Silmarillion. And so, whenever you hear the word chance in Tolkien, it's worth taking just a moment to sit back and think, oh, well, what would have happened if that hadn't have happened? And it seems that there's more, that it's not just luck or chance, but there seems to be some divine intervention or will that is happening. And to the players on the stage, it feels like chance.
Right.
But when you look at it across the whole broad spectrum, it's actually more than just chance. There seems to be some divine intervention there.
Yeah, there's some Eru nudges, let's say.
Yeah, some Eru nudges. I love that. That's great.
He's doing it. He's doing his thing. I do really like Thingol goes, Silmarils, that seems like a big deal. Like he's like, hey, that's the name of the book.
That's the name of the book. That's the title. And he's like, oh, Feanor, he must have been a great person because I've kind of heard about him, even though he seems to have passed on. But he doesn't yet realize that, what Melion has been able to articulate, like the whole fate of the world, the whole fate of Arda, it's now tied and connected to these Silmarils, right? And she's able to really see that. Thingol doesn't yet pick up on that, and I don't think any of the Noldor or any of the other elves really pick up on that. But the story of the Silmarils, and even more specifically, I'd say the story of the Light of the Two Trees, that is the story of Middle Earth, right? What happened to those two trees? This capture in the Silmarils, all of the implications of that, all the way down to Sauron. And Sam has this beautiful moment. I think it's in the Two Towers book, when he's like, I wonder if we'll be in Songs or Tales. And he's like, oh, I just realized we're in the same tale that Bilbo used to tell us about Beren and the Silmarils. Like, Melian has been able to figure this out pretty quickly, that the whole rest of the world, the fate of the world, is now connected with these 3 little gems that contain the light of 2 trees.
Wow. I really like that.
But yeah, that's interesting. You just never see like, oh, this thing led to that thing, led to this thing, led to that thing. And it all ties back to something, right? And it's easy to see in retrospective. Melian here is really showing her wisdom where she could see it in real time, right? And her words specifically, I'm gonna quote from the book. It says, "This is a great matter, greater indeed than the Noldor themselves understand. For the light of Aman and the fate of Arda lie locked now in these things, the work of Feanor, who is gone. They shall not be recovered, I foretell, by any power of the Eldar. And the world shall be broken in battles that are to come, ere they are wrested from Morgoth." Like, Melian is able to piece this together, and she can see the end from this little middle piece right here. And she can even foretell, like, even the Eldar, or all of the elves, they're not going to be able to get the Silmarils back.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, the one Silmaril that they do get back, it's from her own daughter, right? Who is half elf, half Maya, Luthien, and the man Beren, who team up, and they're able to get one of those Silmarils. So it's I just think she's a pretty wise person, Melian, and Thingol would do better to listen to her counsel a little more often.
Absolutely. Well, you've got Finrod here, and Finrod's getting accusations thrown at him by Thingol. And Finrod, just like his sister, doesn't want to spill the beans about everything, doesn't want to throw the Sons of Feanor under the bus. Angrod, of course, who we know was spurned by Caranthir a couple chapters ago, and it has this grudge against the Sons of the Noldor. We know he stalked off angrily after telling them, the ruling about, you can settle these lands from Thingol. And he comes and he's like, actually, they're ugly and they destroyed everything. And here's my burn book about the Sons of Feanor.
And they called me names.
Right.
Yeah, so Angrod really spills it all. He really spills it all. These are Finrod and Angrod, 2 brothers of Galadriel who are visiting her sister there. Thingol is their great uncle of some sort. I forget the exact family connection.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah, but their mother was Teleri, related to Thingol. The family connections are there, right? And it's interesting. Tolkien, sometimes he glazes over some of the plot points that he doesn't quite have figured out. And it's this whole conversation started because it's like suddenly these brothers were visiting Galadriel, and you know what? Thingol, he was a little heated that night. Maybe he had a little too much to drink that night, and he accuses these guys of what they're doing, and I just love he can just kind of glazes over that. But then we get this whole conversation. Angrod he spills all of the beans. The Sons of Feanor, they did this kinslaying. That's just a very tragic and evil thing to do. But he still says, we were not a part of that, right? I'm going to quote from the book again. He says, guiltless, we came forth, save maybe of folly, to listen to the words of fell Feanor, and become as if besotted with wine, as if briefly. And so, he kind of says, yeah, Feanor did that. He and his sons did that. We didn't participate in it. And then they left us behind. They took all the boats and they took them across the sea and they burnt them. And then we had to atone for whatever our folly was by passing through the grinding ice. And we go back to the trailers of season 1 of Rings of Power, and there was this passage of elves going through ice. And we know now that it was sort of that opening scene of episode 1. But one of my first theories was we're going to see Galadriel and Finrod and all their folks traveling through the grinding ice at the first age. Right. Of course, we kind of glazed over that in the prologue of Rings of Power. But that crossing of the ice, not an ideal situation for those elves. And Thingol seems to buy it. He seems to say, okay, maybe you didn't participate in this. Yeah, maybe you were a little bit caught up in Feanor's sort of vision of going back to Middle-earth and reclaiming the Silmarils. And you did have to pay for it through the grinding ice. So he sort of forgives them for that. But this is another one of the oaths. I'm going to call it an oath that Thingol makes. And he essentially provides the first censorship of Middle-earth. he says that the language of Quenya, or the language that the Noldor speak, is no longer allowed to be speak anywhere where the Sindar elves are. And so, just a quick recap: the Noldor came to Valinor. They saw the light of the trees. The Sindar were willing to make that journey, but they never actually made it to see the light of the trees.
Right.
So there's a lot more Sindar than there are Noldor in Middle Earth. But it's from this point forth that Thingol says, hey, if you speak Quenya, the language of the Noldor, then I'm going to count you as a traitor. I'm going to count you as a treasonous traitor, and you will not be allowed in my presence or in my realms. And the elves pick up on that, and they follow that language ban. And what does that mean for you and I? Well, what that means for us is that most of the Elvish words that you and I know, and most of the Elvish here, like in the Peter Jackson movies, that is Sindarin Elvish. It's not Quenya, right? Like, for example, I mean, we talked about Gondolin before. Well, Gondolin is the Sindarin word for that hidden kingdom, right? Tolkien gave us the Quenya word,
Right.
Onlindale, or whatever that was that I couldn't pronounce earlier. He gave us that one. But even something like, when the fellowship's outside the doors of Moria, and Frodo's like, oh, it's a riddle. What's the Elvish word for friend? And Gandalf says, Melon, Melon, that is a Sindarin word. Galad, as in Galadriel or Gil-galad, that is the Sindarin word for light. Imladris, the Elvish name for Rivendell, is a Sindarin word. Lothlorien, where Galadriel will end up, is a Sindarin word. The Quenya was Lorient, something like that. And so not all of it, but most of the Elvish that people can pick up on and kind of remember, it is that sort of Sindarin Elvish, that everyday speaking Elvish. And Quenya sort of becomes this language of lore. Our real world equivalent would be like Latin, where, we kind of study Latin, but nobody really speaks that. That's sort of what Quenya, or the language of the Noldor, becomes because of this oath of
and it's
Thingol.
an interesting thing in Rings of Power. They choose to have the Númenóreans, to have Elendil speak to Galadriel in Quenya, not in Sindarin. And I wonder, two theories I have on that is just, he comes from the line of Elros. Elros was a lore guy, probably dealt a lot in Quenya more than Sindarin, wouldn't have had a lot of reasons to speak in Sindarin. But the other thing is, I know that this is your language, Galadriel, so I'm going to speak this one to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, did he know both dialects of
Seems
Elvish,
like a smart guy,
if you will? Like, yeah, and so it's an interesting choice. And we do know that the Noldor, even amongst themselves, they sort of kept the language alive. But mostly for the friendship with the Sylvan elves, they do pick up Sindarin as sort of the everyday language.
Right. I wanted to go back to your point on that Thingol just kind of accepts what they say. There's this concept that our frequent Tolkien scholar, we call her our favorite Tolkien scholar, Marilyn Arpukila, who she always brings this up, Osanwe Kenta. Have you heard this term? Because I hadn't before
not.
her. This comes from an essay in Morgoth's Ring.
Okay.
That says basically people, especially the wise, mostly the wise in Tolkien, can sort of see the light intention of each other's minds. And so I can open myself up to you, and so that you can understand my intention and my general vibe, my general thoughts. And people can close off. And so when Anatar goes to Celebrimbor, he's closed off, which is why Celebrimbor was suspicious of Anatar. And I've thought about this a lot, and as I go through the chapters now, and I think this is probably one of those where Finrod says, take a look a little bit, understand my mind and understand that I'm telling you the truth here. And I think that's why the elves are able to trust each other more than men are, more than non-Númenórean men are, because I know the Númenórean men are capable of doing this too.
Yeah, they kind of pick up on that a little bit. Yeah, that's really interesting. And forgive me the Star Wars reference, but Yoda speaks to Luke, right? Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. Like that in Tolkien, that is so true with the elves. Like, they are not just beings of flesh, right? There's this spiritual component to them, this other dimension that is not necessarily objective or physical, but there is certainly this sort of metaphysical, spiritual, telepathic dimension to how elves communicate. Even when elves first found men, they couldn't speak in language, but sudden, I can't remember the elf who found him, but he's strumming on his guitar or his harp, and like the men start to kind of understand the intention of his mind, right? And so they are able to communicate somewhat telepathically there. So yeah, that I love that. What did you call that again?
Osanwe Kenta.
Osanwe Quenta. Okay, that's awesome.
I'll send it in the chat so you have the spelling. This is exciting stuff. I actually had to Google it, and I had to do 3 Google searches to find the right term because Marilyn just throws these terms at me, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. So I Google stuff, and that's how we become Lorehounds.
Exactly. those Tolkien scholars, they can be a little intimidating. They know their stuff. They know their stuff. Yeah,
they know a lot of stuff, especially something from Morgoth's Ring.
Yes,
I've not read Morgoth's Ring. I don't know about you.
I'd like. I think of 2 pages. I think 2 or 3 pages.
Okay. Okay. My goal is to eventually read all of History of Middle Earth. I'm not there yet.
Wow, that's
it's a long-term goal.
Yes,
it's a long-term goal.
That's a lifelong goal right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
so that's kind of the two oaths that we've talked about thus far. Kind of the oath of Feanor and his sons, and how that leads to the doom of Mandos, and the Noldor are there in Middle Earth. They're sort of doomed there. The second oath there is Thingol. No more Quenya. We have a ban on that. And I'd say there's one more oath here that comes into play in this chapter, and it's in the very last paragraphs that Tolkien seemed to kind of throw into this chapter. Galadriel's visiting Finrod back at Nargothrond. And she's like, "Hey, how come you're not married yet? Right. That's what we always ask.
That's what we do.
Yeah. You're single and she's single. Why don't you get together?" So, and Finrod kind of has this foresight into the future, and he's like, "You know what? There's some future oath that I'm going to have to be free to make." And so he's like, "I can't be wed now, so that I can go ahead and make that oath." And spoiler alert, that oath is going to be with Beren, in helping Beren to reclaim one of the Silmarils so that he can win the Hand of Luthien.
Mm-hmm.
So you come all the way back full circle of what Melian has already known, that the fate of Arda is tied to these Silmarils, and even Finrod in his own personal journey and his oath, this future oath that he's going to have to make, is tied back into those Silmarils. Plus, it also helps that the elf that he loved didn't come to Middle Earth. She stayed over there in Valinor. So, Finrod's
he's got his high school sweetheart waiting for him back home.
Yeah. She's all the way back there. He's living the bachelor life, and he's going to help out Beren.
He was a skater boy. She said, "See you later, boy." and that was that. That was that.
Oh man. If any of your listeners get that reference, then we'll know that that's they're our generation.
Oh, if I can see the analytics on Red Circle, they are absolutely our generation. They are 30 to 37 or whatever.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Well, everyone, it's been a lot of fun. Aaron, any other thoughts on this chapter before we close it out?
No, I don't think so. Actually, let me just say one. Galadriel and Melian, I wish we had more of that relationship. Because you see Galadriel, she's a powerhouse, right? She speaks up with all of the stuff that's going on before they leave Valinor. She wants to have kingdoms of her own, which eventually she will. But she's able to come to Melian, and that tutelage, I think, from one of the Maiar who is living in this physical realm, I think tempers her a lot.
Yeah. And
I just wish that we could explore more of a Maya mentor to a first age Galadriel. That's a missed opportunity in my book, and I would really love to have dived deeper on that.
Well, we can ask for a spinoff after Rings of Power.
Yes, absolutely. If they can get rights to the Silmarillion.
Maybe one day. I think we might have to go one more generation down for that to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. Aaron, thanks for coming. Can you tell everyone again where they can find you?
Yeah, head on over to the Lore of the Rings podcast. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere where you listen to podcasts. Also Instagram, Facebook, just Lore of the Rings podcast. You'll find me there. and look forward to wandering Middle Earth with you over on the Lord of the Rings podcast. And John, thank you for letting me wander Middle Earth with you today.
Of course, I anytime. If you ever want to cover another chapter, you just send me an email.
Yeah, I love these bite size. Let's focus on one Silmarillion chapter. So
Yeah.
I probably will. This has been fun.
All right, thanks, Aaron. See you soon.
All right, thanks, John.
As always, that was a lovely conversation with Aaron from Lord of the Rings. I hope everyone will go check out Aaron's podcast. For now, I want to talk to you about what's coming next on the Lorehounds feed. We are in mid-August, and I am recording this in the past, so if I get some things missing, you know why. For now, I know that there's this episode this week. You should have already heard all our coverage of House of the Dragon and the Acolyte, and coming soon is our coverage of Rings of Power. So make sure that you check out our full breakdown of both the teaser and the San Diego Comic-Con trailer. You can find those both on this feed and in the main Lorehounds feed, which you can find in the link tree in the show notes. Marilyn Arpukila will be joining us for all of our coverage of the Rings of Power. We're going to be doing a main podcast, maybe a feedback podcast, depending on volume, and definitely a Lorecast that is going to be exclusive to subscribers on Patreon and Supercast, and our Season Pass. So the Season Pass should already be launched. That's in the show notes. You can get basically the Patreon or Supercast treatment for just Rings of Power content for $10 flat fee, so you don't have to worry about recurring subscriptions. Or you can be with us recurring, and for as little as $5 a month, you can get all of our coverage of every other thing we're covering. I'm not sure what else is coming out on the Lorehounds Network right now because, again, this is in the past, but please check out all our affiliates like Rings and Rituals, Woolshift Dust, Radioactive Ramblings, Properly Howard in the show notes. Check the link tree. And I just need to do our thank yous before we head out of here. Our Discord server boosters are Gnarls, Aaron K, Tiller the Thriller, Dork of the Ninjas, Duve71, Captain Gingy 56, Athena A, Lore Masters, Samartian, Michael G, Michelle E, David W, Brian P, SC, Peter OH, Bettina W, Adam S, Nancy M, Duve71, Brian 8063, Frederick H, Sarah L, Gareth C, Eric F, Matthew M, Sarah M, DJ Miwa, Andra B, Kwang Yu, Deadeye Jedi Bob, Nathan T, Alex V, Aaron T, Sub-Zero, Aaron K, Dally V, Mothership 61, Gnarls, Kathy W, Stuart B, Jeffrey B, Elisa U, and Adrian. Thanks, everyone. It's always a pleasure to talk Tolkien, and we will see you on the next Silmarillion story. The Lorehounds podcast is produced and published by The Lorehounds. You can send questions and feedback and voicemails at thelorehounds.com/contact. Get early and ad-free access to all Lorehounds podcasts at patreon.com/thelorehounds. Any opinions stated are ours personally and do not reflect the opinion of or belong to any employers or other entities. Thanks for listening.